Very live.
Awesome. Welcome everybody who is joining us tonight. We are a few minutes early, but we will give everybody a few minutes to join. So everybody just hang tight and we'll get started. All right, good evening, everybody out there. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're so thankful for so much involvement. We had a lot of signups today, and we're very thankful to see the engagement, and it just shows a testament to our community and willingness to get involved in how important this topic can be. So we thank you very much for being here. I'm Callie Wilsey. I am with the City Manager's Office in the City of Reno. I am managing this project for the City of Reno this year. I am joined today with our consulting partners, Sarah Seeloff, Ben Maloney, and Ken Martin. We are going to learn more about them and their role and their background here in a little bit. Tonight's meeting, we're really kicking off the process with the community for the 2021 redistricting project for the City of Reno. Tonight, we'll be giving a presentation on just an overview of what this process will look like, outlining the next steps, how to get involved, how to provide feedback, and the timeline. And this is really of particular importance this year, as we have a very succinct timeline. Like most things that we've experienced, the pandemic has impacted the release of redistricting data. So we have a very succinct timeline. So key timeframes are going to be discussed tonight, which will be important if you are interested in really taking a deep dive and providing detailed input on maps once those are released. A few notes: we are recording this meeting tonight, and we'll be posting that video on our website. If you need to go back and review it, or if there's anybody interested who wants to listen to it afterwards, this will be available. Similarly, following tonight's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So feel free to jot down questions, and when we get there, we look forward to chatting with you. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. So the census was completed last year, and what that triggers in the City of Reno Charter is that we require an update to our ward boundaries if the census shows any ward exceeds the population in any other ward by more than 5%. The charter also lays out requirements for how this will work. And any changes that we make to the ward boundaries must be changed through an ordinance. So for us in Reno, that's a two-step process, and which can take a little bit longer. You may see in other entities where it only may take one vote, which is also why we want to talk about timeline tonight. Additionally, the charter requires that these changes be adopted through a 5/7 vote. One thing that I want to talk about related to our charter tonight is this process is focusing on the 5 wards. Right now, the City of Reno has 5 wards, distinct wards, and we are scheduled to move to 6 wards beginning in calendar year 2024. So this process that we're talking about now is to adjust the boundaries for the 5 wards. For the 6 wards, we will have a separate and distinct process at a later date to have that conversation. Those changes were made through legislative action a few years ago. Back in July, the Reno City Council adopted a set of principles that are going to help guide the process for us this fall refining our ward boundaries. The FLO team here will be providing additional context on what a lot of these mean in the redistricting process, but a few of them that I just wanted to point out that federal and state laws are really matter in this process, and it's really important to this process in drafting our ward boundaries. The council also felt it was very important that community input is considered in this process. And so we have built a timeline and a process for that to occur. Similarly, the 2020 data, census data will be the driving data source for this process. And on that note, as we started to analyze the data, I wanted to highlight a few trends for you. The 2020 census showed Reno is growing. You can see from here between 2010 and 2020, Reno became home to more than 38,000 people, which represented an increase of just over 17%. When we look at that by ward, you can really see that Ward 2 witnessed the fastest growth rate in the city at over 33%. Ward 2 represents South Reno as well as portions of Southwest Reno. If you're out there and you want to look up what ward you currently live in, you can head to reno.gov/redistricting. We do have the current ward map out there, and you can plug in your address and it'll show you what ward you live in. The other important thing to note here is that you can see that 5% mark that we talked about under the charter has been triggered. And so we'll be moving forward with the process to redraw the boundaries. Similarly, the 2020 census shows that Reno is becoming more diverse. The graph that you're looking at here shows the proportion of Reno population by race and ethnicity, but a few statistics that I also wanted to share comparing 2010, 2020 and the growth that we're seeing there. So more than a quarter of Reno's population is now Hispanic or Latino. The Black, Asian, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic populations all showed higher growth rates compared to the city's white population. And while individuals who are multiracial only make up 5.3% of Reno's population in 2020, this group represents one of the highest growth rates in the last decade at 138%. It's a similar trend we're seeing around the country. We've provided additional demographic data and analysis by ward. You can download those demographic profiles at reno.gov/redistricting as well. Now that we have this redistricting data from the census, we're beginning to move forward towards drafting of the maps. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and the FLO team to provide more details about this process. Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Callie. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. My name is Sarah Seeloff. I'm a senior planner at FLO. I'm based out of Bellingham, Washington. And through a contract agreement with the city of Reno, FLO's role is to support the city and its residents through the redistricting process by providing assistance in developing draft and final redistricting plans. So we've been gathering and processing available data and providing assistance with community outreach like this meeting. And then we will be generating and revising maps based on public input. And then we will also be providing expert advice on how well maps meet federal and state regulations and address the city's and community's priorities. So I'd like to ask my colleagues, Ben Maloney and Kent Martin, to go ahead and introduce themselves as well. Let's start with Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Maloney. I'm one of the demographers / GIS data analysts with FLO Analytics. My primary background is in school district forecasting and redistricting, and I'll be serving primarily as a technical lead for this project. So I'll be working on the maps and assisting with any issues thereof.
Thank you very much, Ben. Kent?
Yeah, good evening. I'm Kent Martin, a senior analyst with FLO Analytics. My role in the project will be kind of as a co-project manager and also an advisor throughout this process. My experience is also in school district redistricting and recently redistricting of various counties around the Northwest.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Kent. Next slide, please, Callie. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about who we are as a company. So FLO is a subsidiary of Mall Foster and Alongi, a multidisciplinary consulting firm headquartered in Vancouver, Washington. Our bread and butter is GIS and data analytics, and our primary clients are local governments and school districts. And we are based in the Pacific Northwest, but have projects all over the map. And we started doing redistricting work at the request of some of the local governments with whom we worked. This has become a larger portion of our work as redistricting requirements have been triggered by the 2020 census. So you can see a list of some of our redistricting clients on this slide. And we do this work because we want to provide impartial, technically sound services to local governments. We do not work for political parties, and it is our goal to make sure that redistricting plans meet the letter and the spirit of the law and serve our communities. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Thank you. So with that, I am going to hand it off to Kent to talk a little bit more about the redistricting process from a broad angle. Kent?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Well, as Sarah mentioned, as our name would imply at FLO Analytics, we're good at analysis. We are very adept at taking maps and taking demographic information and ordering it and making sense of that data. We're very confident that we can get the Reno wards to be closer aligned in terms of population at the end of this process. The one thing that we miss, though, and that we need from you as community members and also from the officials at the city is really your understanding of your own community. We're going to be really trying to pair the analysis that we do with input from the community. And so as we go through our presentation tonight, we'll be sharing both sides of this process, that analysis and some of the redistricting legalities that we need to comply with. But then also we want to talk about our outreach and our engagement with you as community members, because your voice is important and we really need your input in order to make sure that this is a successful process in the end. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben Maloney, who's going to talk really about that foundation of the redistricting laws that we'll be working with.
All right, thank you. So we'll cover for the next few slides some of the criterion or most of the criterion that we are considering when drafting these maps. So just real quick, redistricting itself is governed by laws at multiple levels of government and informed by best practices. Earlier this year, the city of Reno adopted its own set of redistricting principles, which are highlighted in blue on this slide, and overlap significantly with existing federal and state requirements and guidelines. So just going off of these two, you notice on the slide that there are two distinct columns of musts and shoulds. Districts must be population balanced. We'll cover that a few more times over the next few slides. In particular, the fact that the Reno City Charter allows for a 5% variance, and I'll go more into detail on that in the next slide. Districts must be contiguous, and redistricting must be done in compliance with all local, state, and federal laws, including the Federal Voting Rights Act. Also, districts must retain current council members and should preserve communities of mutual interest, should be compact as possible, and should also preserve the use of existing and natural boundaries. Okay. All right, so I mentioned in the previous slide the criterion. The chief amongst those is equal population, specifically the total population and not the number of registered voters of citizen voting age population, which is often referred to as CVAP. This reflects the principle that a city council represents all of the city's residents, not only those who are eligible to vote. And then over here on the other right side of the slide, a few different definitions that we are considering when crafting these maps. First of which is a measure of equal population, which is called the overall range or the maximum deviation from the ideal population. This is simply the total population of the city divided by the number of wards. So for example, if your city has 50,000 people in it, and there are 5 wards, we're looking at an ideal population of 10,000 people for each of those wards. The overall range that you see is calculated as the sum of the deviations from the most and least populated wards. So this brings us back to that maximum deviation a little bit. So if we have that ward with 10,000 people, or to the ideal population of 10,000 people, we're aiming to get within plus minus 5% of that. And when you start manipulating the boundaries, shifting the populations from one ward to the next, and you notice that, say, 2 of your wards, for example, one has a deviation of 7% above that ideal population, and another ward has that ideal population is about 7% below where it should be. At the surface there, it looks like you're pretty close to that 5% or below that we're aiming to get to. In reality, you're adding those 2 together. So your total deviation is around 14%. So there's actually a significant amount of work to do when you're considering this is the absolute deviation of those wards. Yep, okay. A few other things that we're also considering. Number 1 is contiguity. So we're looking for nice tight districts or wards, no islands, except for those allowed by the Reno City Charter, which is noted in the city's redistricting principles. In some instances, also outside of that, you can have islands, but they should be connected by bridges, tunnels, or ferries, which probably isn't a concern over for the city of Reno. We're also looking for compactness. And so when you see the word compactness, you're probably also thinking of gerrymandering, which we hear a lot about every 10 or so years. So we're trying to avoid shapes that you see on the left side in that diagram and keep it more towards what you see in the right side. So typically trying to avoid those weird spindly arms that it looks like they're trying to grab different populations or something that's unnecessarily thin. And there's ways to go about measuring this compactness. There's a few different mathematical models that we could to use to measure that, or probably the best that we could initially use is just the eye test. Does it pass the eye test? Does it look more than what you see on the left or more than what you see on the right? If it looks more like what you see on the left, probably already raising a whole bunch of alarms, might be violating the compactness rules. And then finally, existing or natural boundaries. This will cover major streets and roads, highways and such, rivers, lakes and mountains, and then any other lines that are already being used as boundaries are things that we do want to consider when crafting the updated set of ward boundaries. Okay. All right, this one, there's a lot happening here, but real quick, there are a couple different legal requirements worth mentioning and are essentially at odds with one another to some degree. So the 14th Amendment prohibits the use of race ethnicity to draw district boundaries, but at the same time, the Voting Rights Act, or VRA, requires consideration of race ethnicity data to avoid vote dilution, which is what we're trying to cover here in this slide. The box on the left, you see the majority group makes up 75% of the population and makes up the majority in 75% of the districts, whereas the minority group, which makes up 25% of the population, also makes up 25% of the districts. So this is an idealized image here, but this is typically what we would want to see or get something close to this after the redistricting process. We are actively trying to avoid what you see on the right with vote dilution, where that majority of the group of the 75% of the population make up the majority in 100% of the districts, which eliminates the voice of the 25% of the population since they no longer have majority in any of the districts. So they will be missing out on important representation that they should be having. So that is a huge concern when we are recrafting these boundaries. Okay. And then finally, our communities of interest. There are no set definitions of communities of interest, but we in particular like this one that is paraphrased a little bit from the Constitution of California. It is a community of interest or shared interest is a population that shares common social and economic interests that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. And they are populations that have common needs, interests, and interests reflected in patterns of geography, social interaction, trade, and common interests. And over on the right side, these are some of the things that we would consider a community of interest. The chief amongst those are municipalities. So in a larger geography that's undergoing a redistricting process, usually at the top of everyone's list of things that we need to be concerned about under the redistricting process is municipalities. Typically want to keep those in one district as we start defining and shifting populations around, unless those municipalities are large enough that necessitates some sort of split. School districts are also highly important, and then the boundaries that make up those school districts, so your elementary school boundaries, middle school or high school boundaries are also considered to be communities of interest. Voting precincts is also big ones, fire districts, military installations like you see here, or defined neighborhoods. Gets a little bit more vague when we start, or harder to get the data when we get down to, say, a homeowners association or shared cultural heritage sites or special districts. Most of this information is pulled from, say, a county or state open GIS site. And then some of this also will come from any kind of community input that we get back during this redistricting process, especially something like the shared cultural heritage or areas of common social interactions or common interests. These are not things that are easily defined and just a data point that we can just pull from an open GIS site and then ingest it and then spit it back out into our redistricting program. This is something that requires mention from the community before we can actually start incorporating that. And with that, toss it right over back to Sarah.
Great, thanks very much, Ben. So this slide gives you an overview of the redistricting process, and you can see on the left the goals that we are, or the principles that that are guiding this process. So first of all, a transparent approach, community-informed methodology, right, data-driven results, and an efficient process. And as you can see here, this schematic shows 5 steps. First is data collection, where we've gathered the data using the 2020 census data, and also, as Ben mentioned, some of those GIS overlays that will help us identify communities of interest, like he mentioned. We use those to produce draft maps. And then those maps go out for community input. And that is where we need your input to help make sure that your community of interest is represented, right? Your input goes directly into revising the maps, at which point the maps will be presented again. And we move forward with plan adoption, which in Reno happens through introduction of an ordinance and passage of an ordinance by the city council. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass it over to Kent to explain a little more about what these draft maps and final maps look like. Kent?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we just want to be really clear here that that everyone understands that this process does include, FLO drafting some maps to try to get at that balancing of population within the wards based on this new 2020 census data. But they are just that, they're draft maps. We can make sure that they, each of these different maps meets the criteria that's needed. But again, the thing that's missing is input from the community and communities of interest, as Ben spoke about. And so we'll be bringing back really in a very short amount of time in early October, some maps for folks to review and to give input on from the community. And then that information will be taken back to work on that final map. No draft map is expected to be the final map. It's an iterative process, and we continue to make adjustments throughout the process until we get to a final map. And then on the next slide, again, just the final map incorporates the input that we receive from the public, elements of certainly the revised draft maps. We definitely will work at FLO to uphold all of the statutory requirements and criteria that Ben went through, including the Voting Rights Act. You will definitely see compromises within communities of interest and within each version and each draft of the map. And I will pass it back to Sarah.
Great, thanks very much, Kent. So let's talk about outreach and engagement. You're all here tonight, and thank you very much for your participation and your interest in this process. The website up at the top of this slide, reno.gov/redistricting, is going to be your go-to place online for information about the redistricting process. And as you can see in these screenshots that have been taken, there's a lot of information. You'll find the City of Reno's redistricting principles, answers to common questions about redistricting, and information about how you can participate, as well as a map of existing wards and one-page demographic breakdowns, both for the city as a whole and for the individual wards themselves. You'll also find the meeting and events calendar that you see highlighted here that contains that will continue to be updated, and you will be able to find, for example, the recording of this video at that website. So there will be other public meetings, as you can see on this meeting and events calendar. The next public meeting is slated for October 7th, at which point the preliminary maps or the draft maps will be explained, made available, and we will be seeking your comment, which you will be able to give at reno.gov/redistricting. So again, this is really a great website to bookmark. This is going to be the central repository for information and the place to go to give your comment and help inform the process. Next slide, please. And here is a more detailed timeline. So you can see here we are in September. We have a process ahead of us stretching out to December, when the final data is due to the Washoe County Registrar. So again, just want to highlight that our next community meeting will be on October 7th, at which point the draft maps will be presented. We're requesting comments on those draft maps by 5 p.m. on October 11th. Then we will follow up with community meeting number 3, where we will present the final maps. And then those will be presented on the 27th to City Council, along with introduction of an ordinance. And with that, I believe, Callie, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody, for hearing us out on the presentation. We're at that point in the meeting where we'd love to answer your questions or hear from you. So we know that clearly some folks are on the Zoom, some other folks may have dialed in, so you'll see on your screen some instructions. So just on the Zoom, go ahead and raise your hand. On the phone, you're going to dial 9. The host, our IT department here on the line, will be notified you would like to speak, and they will call on you and ask you to unmute yourself. On Zoom, you would hit unmute, and phone *6. They'll be there to support you if needed. So with that, Department of IT, could you help us and help the first person unmute themselves? Looks like Edward Coleman, you are up.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple of questions. So with these draft maps that are going to be produced, what are they going to show? Specifically, are they going to show racial population concentrations in the city?
Sarah and team, do you guys want to handle what that will look like when those maps are released?
Certainly, Callie. I'm going to ask Ben Maloney to comment on this.
Yeah, there should also be some sort of demographic breakdown of the wards as they are currently constituted, and then what they would look like with the draft maps, whatever they're decided upon.
So I guess to follow up, specifically, is it going to show the locations of racial population concentrations? So are we going to see where the lines stop and how they may or may not be splitting different groups up?
That yeah, that one is not in the plans. What you'll see is just a map of the wards, and then how they're going to be situated along with the demographic breakdown of each of the wards. But I don't think it is in the plans right now to get that fine a detail on the draft maps.
Okay, my second question, the black vote is split between all 5 wards, which dilutes its voting power and ability to gain representation in the city. Will this be addressed in the maps? So I understand you guys seem to be doing a quantitative analysis with this. Are your algorithms going to take into account that? Or is that something that you want feedback on? I'm wondering how that's going to be managed.
That's something that will definitely be under consideration when drafting these maps. So it's not just one particular population that we're going to be looking at. It will be all of them.
I understand that, but I'm speaking about the Black population.
Mhm.
If I can chime in, Mr. Coleman, I think Ben was saying it will be taken into consideration, but the process that we've laid out is we would definitely love to hear input on how the maps either reflected that or don't going through this process. So please stay engaged, and it's good to hear that comment at this stage as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions, or we'll go to the next person? All right, Department of IT, can we bring in the next individual, please?
Hello?
Jeff Morris?
Yes.
Hi, please go ahead.
I live in the southern part of Reno, the growth area, it seems. And in drawing the boundaries, are housing projects that are already approved and started going to be put into a projection to avoid like a population shift of more than the 5% in the near future, in the next year or two? You know that there's a certain number of housing units that are going to come online. Is that part of the process?
Ben, do you have any insight on that in terms of projections? I mean, my thought is the 2020 census data is the data source that kind of legally outlines that and kind of how the process, but wanted to ask you if you've experienced that in any other communities as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, we cannot include projections in there. We do have to use the 2020 census data as is.
Okay, that was the only question I had at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, let's go to the next one. Mr. Pritchett.
Hey, how's my sound?
Good, we can hear you.
Thanks. Eventually, Callie would like to know how many participants were in this meeting. So I entered the first chat question before you disabled it, so you're welcome for that. So we have 6 wards in 2024. Should we interpret this same process, maybe even with the same consultants or similar, would happen again in 2024?
Yeah, yes, potentially. So we will do a process for the 2024 redistricting to go to the 6 wards. What we are hoping, coming through this is to improve the process based on what we experienced this round. So if we hear from the community that we really like something about this process, we want to carry that forward. If there's ways to improve it, we would hope to do that.
Okay, so I mean, so I've gone through this process in other municipalities. So, so far this seems pretty clear. Although how the public could provide notes with or proposals with a GIS would help. But what I'm getting at is Right now, most of the council members will not be here because they are termed out in 2024. Potentially only 2 out of the 6 will be an anchor for a ward configuration, given that the charter apparently requires incumbents to stay in their district. So that becomes a way to bias or skew a district configuration. So, there's merits one way or the other on that. So what I'm getting at is the redistricting opportunity in 2024 will be vastly more flexibility and options to address natural boundaries, communities of interest, the Black population, like my friend Edward said earlier as a comment. Because right now, I don't see a lot of options this year, even though we have to do it this year, because of all these anchor points of where the incumbents reside. And I don't know how also we're going to propose this if we don't have some approximation of where those locations are. But anyway, the 2024 process to me is what's really going to matter for the public. And I'd like the city not to overlook that, not to do some quiet process because it's already done this year. Only 2 out of the 6 council members will be up for re-election in 2024. And of course, that presumes they would want to be up for re-election, although I think they would. So anyway, that's the more prevailing opportunity for the public, not right now, which has kind of limited options. And so anyway, you kind of partially addressed that. And my second actual question,
David, you're starting to cut out. I'm having trouble hearing you on the second point.
What is the legal or
I'm still having trouble. Can my other panelists, can you guys hear them?
It's difficult to understand, unfortunately.
David, we're gonna come back to you on that one. We're having trouble hearing you. Department of IT.
Configuration.
Yeah. David, we'll come back to you. Can we bring in the next participant, please? Good evening. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great.
Well, thank you all for the presentation. My question briefly is, as you know, the city of Reno has a lot of more diverse than the city council has been in the past, and then oftentimes the city council doesn't necessarily represent that in terms of who's on the council. So my question is, do you have plans to make sure that there are at least 2 of the wards remain majority minority wards? If that was clear, I could repeat that if it wasn't clear.
Yeah, will you repeat the question one more time for me?
My question is, do you have any plans to make sure that there are at least 2 of the wards, remain majority minority wards?
Great, thank you for the question. So right now that hasn't been a specific goal outlined in the principles, but I think it is an important feedback point to hear from you and the rest of the community if that is an important topic for us to address through this process.
I would think so. I think just in terms of, we look at the makeup of the city, it would be important to consider that. Thank you for your time, and yeah, thank you for the answer.
Thank you. All right, let's go to the next person. Judy, how are you? Welcome to the meeting? Judy, we're not able to hear you. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay,
There
so
we
can
go.
you hear me now?
We
Great.
can.
Okay, so I just have a couple of comments. The first one is, why are we using the Constitution of California? This is Nevada. Number two is, what happens to islands within a residential neighborhood? And why are we using a Washington consulting firm? Isn't there anybody in Nevada that's qualified? And Ward 2, which is my ward, is way too big. And we have the most population growth. So I'm hoping that this will address that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Judy. I think I can answer a few of those questions. The California Constitution is not weighing in on decision-making. I think the reference to that was it provides a good description of communities of interest, and it's just a way of describing kind of what we're talking about, kind of a neighborhood affinity and a neighborhood kind of personality, if you will. And the city did opt to hire a consultant this year. We were really searching for a firm that had some independent analysis, had not only redistricting experience, but wasn't really affiliated with any political situation. And that is the decision and where we landed on that. But I also wanted to ask Ben to see if maybe, Ben, you could answer the question about islands that maybe would be within a ward. And we may need to ask Judy to clarify a little bit.
Yeah, definitely some additional clarification would help on that one. I'm not quite sure.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Well, in particular, in Ward 2, behind me is a Washoe County and the Reno area that has about 5 2.5 acre parcels within a residential area, and they're zoned like rural. And so we've been through a lot of trials here on people trying to come in and rechange the zoning to like commercial or for charter schools or whatever. And that's really a concern for our area.
So Judy, is the area you're talking about, is it an unincorporated county? Is that what you're meaning?
It's unincorporated county within the Reno sphere of influence and our district, Ward 2.
Gotcha. So Ben, it is not a part of the city's jurisdiction, but it's like a county island that is
that's correct.
Within our jurisdiction, but they are not, that area is not necessarily in our jurisdiction. So I would assume that those that population is counted under the county's districts, and how when they do their rezoning, they would be counted in that work. It's a good point, Jody.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks, Judy. Can we go to the next person? Hi, Riley, how are you?
Hi there, good, thank you. You hear me okay?
We can.
First, let me apologize if any of these questions were answered at the beginning of the meeting. I had a little trouble logging in on time, but my first question was, is there a reason that we're redistricting ahead of the legislature? And second question has to do with if I understood correctly that the rezoning for the 6th ward isn't going to take place as part of this, or if it is.
So I'll start with the second question, then I'll go to your first one. So you are correct. So we are going to essentially talk about redistricting twice in 4 years. This time we'll be redistricting the 5 wards in preparation for next year's election. The 6th ward isn't scheduled to go into place until 2024. And then on your other note, the reason we are getting this process started now is just because of the length of time it takes us, and we wanted to have a good process that would allow community involvement and input. And in order for us to get the maps and the data over to the registrar for the work that they need to do in preparation for things like candidate filing, we needed that time to get the process started. Do you have any other questions, Riley?
No, thank you. I think that's good for now. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. So the next person, please. Wanda, hi, how are you this evening?
Okay, I have a weird question for you though.
Okay.
I'm wondering if they're taking into account that yes, South Reno has grown quite substantially, but we actually have 2 council members that live in South Reno. And so we are not into the boundaries currently and our natural boundaries. And we actually are kind of an island in of ourselves. I'm in Ward 3. And I'm kind of wondering if that was just to keep our council member in the ward. I really don't understand. So I'm hoping that, you know, that would probably be taken into consideration now, but may not be taken into consideration the next time. Or why are we splitting up the districts that go from South Reno all the way up to North Reno? And technically it could be tighter like they were showing in the graphs.
Sure. Wanda, you were cutting out a little bit, but I think, I think I heard your feedback correctly in terms of trying to understand and get more information in relation to kind of current council members and where they live and how that would impact the process.
Yes, because it's so spread out. I mean, South Reno is representing North Reno. That doesn't seem correct.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it would be great to kind of get your input on that. And it sounds like there's a particular issue and concern you're thinking about. So it would be great. Maybe Wanda, if you could maybe email me those details, that would be great. And we can incorporate that in as part of the feedback process.
I will be happy to do that.
Thank you. To the next person. Adrian, hopefully I got that right.
Yes.
How are you?
Great. My question is about people who are in temporary housing or are unhoused. How are they counted in this process? I guess, you know, I'm thinking unhoused people, shelters, treatment centers, and I'm guessing the jail is outside of the Reno area, but you know, is also a sort of question I have. How are prisoners counted in this process?
Sarah and team, do you guys know how that works in relation to the census counts?
Certainly. So I can definitely address the question about prisoners. And what I can say is that Nevada passed a law in the last couple of years. I apologize, I can't remember the exact date, that required the state to apportion prisoners according to their last known address. This is a kind of law that has passed in several other states. But this data is, the law requires that this data be used at the state and congressional level. So for state legislature districts and congressional districts. So that does not figure into the data. It does not, the law does not apply to the municipal redistricting process. Ben, do you have any additional insights to offer on the subject of people who are in temporary housing or those who are unhoused? What I would offer is that certainly because we're using the census data and the census is a snapshot in time, I don't have any details, unfortunately, on how these populations would be reflected in the census. But Ben, if you've got anything to add, please do so. And otherwise, perhaps we can circle back and find more information.
Yeah, certainly. The census does attempt to count the unhoused population as best they can. I'm not too sure how great they did. I don't know if there's a specific measure of that, but the attempt is made. As far as something like group homes or along those lines, or temporary housing, that is definitely also counted. And those are the statistical categories that you could actually bring up on, say, like data.census.gov. There are some estimations of that also. So if they are being accounted for in the census to whatever degree they were able to account them, they do make it into this analysis as part of the population per block that we're taking a look at when constructing the new boundaries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Let's go to the next person, please. Hi, how are you?
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this great presentation. My name is Noel Orozco, and I have two questions. The first one is, are you planning on having any of this information or resources available to the community in other languages other than English?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and thank you very much. We have been talking about that, and I have another discussion scheduled for that tomorrow to figure out the best way to make that happen. If you have any suggestions, I would love to hear from you, and maybe we can also chat offline about that, because it is something that we would like to do going forward in this process.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I look forward to communicating with you. I have your email already. And my next question is a little bit on with one of the previous questions about the incarcerated populations. So it was actually in 2019 when that law had passed. But if you in the city of Reno would you be able to implement basically what the bill was trying to do? The state, I know it impacts the state and congressional levels, but if the city of Reno wanted to do it on its own, is that something that you can do right now? Or I guess how would that process work so that the city would be able to basically mimic AB 450, which happened at the state level? Thank you.
My answer to that tonight is I'm not sure. It's something that I would have to think about and try to figure out if we could do that and how we could go about doing that. So I hope I can kind of take a pause on that, and we can chat about that and think about that implication and what that could look like. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Callie, if I could just jump in response to Noe's first question. First, Noe, thank you so much for contributing the year and the bill number related to that recent legislation in Nevada regarding counting the incarcerated population. I did also want to share that reno.gov/redistricting does have a translation function. So you'll see that right in the middle of the screen when you first bring it up on your browser.
I see it now. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, David, you're back with your second point.
Thanks. I'll try this again on my mobile device. So remind us, what is the legal or policy basis why a ward can include an incumbent who is not going to be affected anymore by the ward configuration?
Sure. So
I mean, did that make sense? We're driving a process for incumbents who are not going to be there anymore and are certainly not up for re-election. Why do we do that?
Great, thanks, David. For me, I think what well, first, let me ask Sarah, Ben, or Kent, if you guys have a reaction to that. I think it's for me, what I'm hearing from the community is wanting to dive into that a little bit more, and so would I, and maybe we can address that at the next meeting a little bit more in depth. But I'm hearing that kind of question and that deeper thought process coming from multiple people.
Well, I'll just offer a tidbit, and it's probably stuck in the city charter for now, but lots of places do not require a termed out incumbent to be a driver for the configuration. So if the new ward configuration happens, those incumbents, in their last years, they're termed out, they can still represent the ward even though they're not a resident of the new configuration. That we should be able to do that here. Thanks.
Thanks, David, for your feedback. Let's go to the next person, please. Hi, Jeff.
I have no further questions. That must have been a glitch.
Okay, no worries. Do we have anybody else with their hand raised, Department of IT? Hello there.
Looks like we're all good. Last one was a glitch.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate you coming out. Great questions. Sarah, do you have any closing comments? And then I'll close it up for the group for the evening.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Just want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you very much for your questions, and encourage you to visit reno.gov/redistricting. That website is going to be updated. And again, that'll be your primary point for information and contributing testimony about your community of interest. Thanks very much.
Yeah, and I would just like to reiterate, everybody, I appreciate you guys coming out tonight. If you have any additional comments, questions, or feedback in advance of the next meeting, please email me at redistricting@reno.gov. And the website will be that source of information. Appreciate all of the comments, already kind of shedding some insight for us in hearing from you guys. It's been great, as well as all the questions. So we really appreciate it, and I hope you all have a great evening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.